Go.
Good afternoon, Professor. My name is Carl Grant. I'm here with my colleagues, Sean McGee and David Slade. We're going to display to you the views on athletes and social media. Here in the introduction, we talk about a few bullet points, the impact social media has on fans' perspective of athletes. We'll be referring to Kobe Bryant's 2003 sexual assault case, and also be talking about sports bloggers and other fans' opinions and how they influence a fan's perception on an athlete. Here are 5 research questions that we sought to find out during this research paper, and I'll just go over it real quick. One is, how does the coverage of athletes through social media influence the fans' perception of those athletes? How does athletes posting on social media affect their own image and influence fans' perspectives on them? In what ways does athletes and fan interaction change a fan's view of an athlete? How are sports fans being persuaded or influenced by social media outlets? Who post content that fans consume? And last but not least, how are interactions between sports fans and or sports bloggers on social media impacting the way sports fans perceive an athlete? So here in our lit review, we decided to talk about the connection of social media and how it affects the perspective of fans. In the process of doing this lit review, we realized that we are one of the first to have the study that we're looking for and how the coverage of an athlete, perceived fans. Within that, we talk about the dominance social media has on today's society. Social media changes the way we interact. The coverage of athletes on social media is different from how it was back in the day. Athletes' presence on the social media accounts a lot into how fans perceive them and how fans interact with social media.
Yeah, Carl, to take it over right now, talking about the methods section. So in our methods section to do this study, we want to do a mixed methods approach, which obviously since talking to us. It really helped us gain a better understanding of the data. We had a survey in place, and the survey would have been great, but the qualitative data really reinforced the quantitative data that we had. So it was a great approach to do the mixed methods approach instead of just quantitative and do a survey. We had 85 total participants answering a convenient survey for the quantitative data. We used a Likert type scale of survey questions for the 85 participants. And then we chose 3 of those participants to do an interview for the qualitative data. We asked them a range of open-ended questions, some of the same questions that were in the survey, but open-ended instead of closed-ended, which we got really meaningful and interesting answers from that made for really interesting results. And then the last thing in the method sections, of course, was the informed consent that we read to all participants before they took the survey and answered our interview questions. So going into the results real quick, this is the demographics table we made. It's just the average demographics table, talking about the number of samples for our participants we had, age, gender. Majority of our participants were male. Majority of our participants were from the suburban area, and a majority of them were white. An interesting thing here was a lot of average participants spent between 0 to 2 or 3 to 5 hours on social media. I think we thought that there might be a little more, 6 to 8, or maybe at least one person 9+ with how many people are on social media today. But that was something that I thought stood out. Going into some of the major findings and results for us is when asked if they believe social media has changed the way athletes are perceived, the majority chose very likely, 54.8%, and 33.3% chose likely. I think that just shows how social media really does impact the way fans are viewing these athletes. And when asked if social media has changed their opinion on a specific athlete in the past, 26 responded very likely, which is 31%. 20 responded likely, which is 23.8%, and 24, which is 28.6%, responded unsure. So that's, if you combine that together, that's around, let's say, 65, 70% of the people were either very likely, or unsure if social media has changed their opinion on a specific athlete, which is a large percentage of our participants that believe or are unsure that social media has changed their opinion on a specific athlete in the past. Some of the two quotes listed are quotes that I think stand out on how the impact or influence social media has on fans. One quote on an interview question we received was, "I say it does affect my perception of the athlete. It can give them a negative stigmatization or a positive stigmatization depending on what I'm viewing or how I'm viewing it." And he was saying that about social media when he says it. I think that's a statement that kind of reinforces why we did this study. The fact that social media, whether there's things posted on social media that are positive, it can give an athlete a better image. But if there's something negative at the same time, that athlete can really suffer from negative postings on social media. One of the other quote on this slide is, "I think it opens your mind to a wider range of opinions." So if you were to see a blogger say something, you would say, yeah, he has a good point. So I think it just diversifies opinions. This was a quote, obviously, about sports bloggers and how the kind of like atmosphere or culture of sports bloggers and other sports fans, that group mentality, people kind of want to think the same way, which is something that we saw in this as well. And then going off this quote, really, it's more that you see these other opinions through social media. No matter what, whether you agree or not, it gives you another opinion or another way of thinking about an athlete, which is really interesting to see or think about, that social media kind of has that influence on a fan, on an average fan who just sees something on social media. It can instantly make them think or feel differently about an athlete. Some unexpected results and limitations we saw were a lot of the responses in our survey were neutral or the middle ground, which is unsure. The survey had two questions that had well over 30% of the participants respond with unsure, which means which means social media hasn't really been fully researched in the effect it has on the minds of sports fans, but just in general on the users of social media. Fans, and another this bullet point is, fans viewing Kobe Bryant in a positive way through social media, as well as not letting journalists' opinions negatively influence their perception of Bryant. So with the two questions we asked in our survey was, has social media made you have a positive image on Kobe Bryant? And majority of the questions were yes, very likely or likely. And I don't think there was anyone that said that they disagreed with it. And the other question was, when journalists proposed or tweeted out the thing about his sexual assault case in 2003, did that negatively influence your perception on Kobe Bryant? And it was very not very likely to not likely, with majority of the people saying that it did not influence them to think negatively of Bryant, which was really interesting because we thought there would be more people that would, considering the 2003 case, would think to think of Bryant and that athlete negatively because of the circumstances. Other things for limitations is the demographic of the participants were mostly college students and from the tri-state area. We tried to get it out to a wide range of people, but with the circumstances, it was a little harder. And coronavirus, like I'm alluding to, making everything we did online and doing phone interviews was harder for us, for example, than getting that face-to-face interaction, really seeing how an interviewee responds to a question, or seeing them face-to-face and getting a feel of how they're answering those questions. And then the last thing we kind of had a hard time is we had a hard time finding participants who interacted with an athlete on social media to really grasp the impact an interaction between athlete and fan has on the perception of a fan on an athlete. And that's just some of the limitations we had, which I'd like to think we overcame.
Okay, so hi, David. Now we're going to get into a little bit of our implications from what we found. One of the big things we found was that are finding support that social media definitely plays a large role in influencing fans, but not all influencers online have the same amount of influence. And we found that specifically in the case of when looking at fans' influence on other fans, responses were rather unsure or maybe even negative, whereas listening to reporters or online organizations, it was very positive. So we found, influencers who offered a wide range of opinions were well regarded, such as, reporters or really established like personality influencers, but influencers who held like different positions on, say, Kobe Bryant, for instance, with the sexual assault case. When someone viewed it positive, Kobe Bryant positively, the negative views were taken a little less negatively, or just weren't even responded to at all. Almost like groupthink, pretty much. Fans recognize the group mentality of like fan groups, and that probably explains a little bit of the whole fan perspective on other fans. This is a little bit also on possible future studies in this field. We believe that research into the study could look at the phenomena around fan and athlete interaction specifically. So just that field would be a really big field to look into, because we didn't get a chance to look at how athletes participate in this whole field as much as we wanted to. And another one you could look at is the effects of sports bloggers and professional influencers like reporters, organizations specifically, on fans' perspectives. And finally, in our conclusion, our study focused on social media and its various influencers' effects on fan perspectives and athletes. We concluded that social media has a large effect, but fans concluded that influencers varied on how much real influence they had, citing different perspectives, groupthink, positive, negative, in stigmatization, and so on and so forth. Other fans had the least perceived amount of influence, while reporters and organizations had more perceived influence. Studies in the future would benefit from observing more focused groups, such as athletes or sports reporters specifically, from what we found.
Yeah, and I guess just overall, I think the study went into something that wasn't really researched before, the total effects of social media and how it impacts fans' views on an athlete. And I think what we discovered here and what we concluded is that it definitely does have an impact on fans' views on an athlete, whether that be negative or positive. And there's definitely further studies that can be developed off of this same topic. With that, I guess, thank you, Professor. It's been kind of a crazy. I'm just saying, thank you, Professor. And I hope you liked this presentation.